I was shocked when I found out I had diabetes. Suddenly, I had to give myself an insulin shot in the stomach.
Ever since I was diagnosed, it has affected my life. I'm 29. There's no foreseeable future for children for us because of the finances and because of my health.
We are currently estimating something over 400 million people with diabetes today in the world.
We like to describe this as a global catastrophe in slow motion. So if you put together the productivity losses, you put together the healthcare costs, the medical costs, it's astronomical.
I mean, we know that the pharmaceutical industries relating to diabetes are making a lot of money. It's a wonderful world for the diabetes pharmaceutical company.
I was born in 1963. In February 1975, I went to a concert. When I got home, I felt tired and very weak. I spent the night drinking water and peeing. The next day, I did blood tests and was told I had type 1 diabetes.
Type 1 diabetes strikes without warning. Musician Bertrand Borgalat's pancreas stopped producing insulin 45 years ago. Medical science has yet to explain fully why, or to find a cure for the disease. Diabetes is insidious, and people's lives are often severely disrupted.
Doing it again?
It showed 0.81. There's always a delay. I'm not thinking about the show. I'm wondering what I'll do if I have too much sugar. I'll be exhausted. And not having enough is also a problem.
Take something sweet on stage.
For a type 1 diabetic, the injection is a relatively minor hassle in the list of inconveniences. Some things are much worse. 10 jabs a day to feel okay is fine. What's exhausting is constantly calculating whether you have too much sugar or insulin. Constantly thinking about all those constraints, trying to think ahead. The insulin you inject acts a lot more slowly than the insulin the pancreas produces. You have to anticipate. There's lots of things every day that are much more of an inconvenience than shots.
The body needs certain amounts of sugar to function at different levels of exertion. Even the smallest activity requires energy. The metabolic system gets the sugar it needs from reserves in the blood. If blood sugar levels become too low, the result is hypoglycemia. But too much sugar in the blood can trigger hyperglycemia. The pancreas regulates sugar in the blood of healthy people. The organ produces insulin, a vital hormone. If this process is disrupted, the result is what is known as type 1 diabetes. Without insulin, blood sugar levels rise, causing organs to fail. Patients fall into a coma and will eventually die if not treated. Several synthetic insulin injections a day help patients regulate their blood sugar levels. As the consumer society emerged in the 1960s, a second kind of diabetes, type 2, started to become more common. Lifestyles and eating habits were changing.
Go on, take it. All right, Mum.
People started consuming more fats and sugars and exercising less. The pancreas had to start secreting more and more insulin to offset the high levels of glucose or sugar in the blood, and sometimes it would stop working properly. The amount of sugar in food continually increased during the 20th century. Processed meals, soft drinks, and foods rich in carbohydrates were consumed in large amounts. The number of diabetes patients climbed rapidly within just a few decades, from 50 million to 430 million worldwide. 90% suffer from type 2 diabetes. The cases were initially concentrated in Western countries, in Europe and the US. Then they spread around the world. 30 years ago, diabetes was rare in China. Today, 1 in 10 adults has it. The chronic disease has also spread in Africa. A 150% increase in cases is expected by 2050.
Type 2 diabetes is a classic common disease, a cultural disease. In the 1960s, less than 1% of the population in Germany was diabetic. Today, we estimate between 9 and 11%.
The disease creeps up on its victims unannounced until suddenly serious health problems appear.
Hello, Dr. Bussmann. Good morning. Let's take a blood sample. Come with me. The elevated blood sugar levels carry the threat of complications. Many diseases can develop. Microvascular problems are the main concern and can occur in the eyes and kidneys. Nerves as well, because they could possibly be damaged by narrowed blood vessels. The major blood vessels in the neck and heart are also at risk. That means people with diabetes face a statistically higher risk of heart attack than people who've actually already had one and who don't have diabetes. One of the most feared complications is diabetic foot. It happens when the nerves no longer function correctly. The feet may then no longer feel many sensations, and people step on things. They get wounds on their feet and legs, but don't notice them. These then become infected, and that's when the real problems that can lead to amputation begin. Does that hurt?
Diabetes is one of the leading causes of amputation in Europe and the US. The disease can also attack the kidneys, and as a result is a main cause of dialysis and kidney transplants.
La science permet à l'homme de repousser ses limites.
The pharmaceutical industry reacted quickly to the rapid rise in type 2 diabetes.
Aujourd'hui, moi, diabétique, grâce à un cul-de-chèque mobile, le lecteur de glycémie tout en un et sans bandelette.
In the 1980s, a wide range of treatments were introduced, with advertising campaigns that promised a happy and carefree life.
Destiné aux personnes atteintes de diabète. Demandez conseil à votre médecin ou pharmacien. Roche Diabète Care avant...
Oh!
A whole range of pills became available to help patients lower their blood sugar. oral anti-diabetics. The drugs could control the disease, but not cure it. Patients had to take them for life, and their price kept rising. Diabetes had become too expensive. Communities around the world sounded the alarm. The disease cost healthcare systems about $760 billion a year worldwide.
There is a UN declaration on diabetes in 2006. Because of its potential to cripple any healthcare system, because of its costs, and to actually the potential to affect the productivity of the country with the number of people with diabetes that need treatment, but that are also invalids because of diabetes and unable to work because of their diabetic complications. It is the only other condition apart from HIV/AIDS that has a UN declaration.
In 1921, Canadian doctors Frederick Banting and Charles H. Best discovered insulin and made industrial production possible. The revolutionary innovation saved thousands of lives. Children who were facing certain death were treated with spectacular success. The Canadian researchers sold their patent for a symbolic $1 to Lilly, an American pharmaceutical company, for commercial production.
Could you tell me anything about insulin? What it is and how it's made?
Well, it's not made exactly. It comes from animal pancreas. The plant works day and night to supply the demand for insulin and uses many tons of pancreas each week. Most of the pancreas comes from abroad and arrives at the factory deep frozen. It is reduced to a paste and mixed with alcohol, which dissolves the insulin. Then follows a long and complex series of processes which gradually remove all the impurities.
The manufacturing process was continually refined. Today, 3 companies compete for new patents: Lilly, the Danish company Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi of France. Human insulin, based on the human gene for insulin, eventually emerged and led to an increase in price. In some countries, human insulin can be 10 times more expensive than insulin derived from animals.
It became possible to take the human insulin gene, simply cut out from the chromosome of humans, put the gene into a little microorganism. We use yeast, like baker yeast or beer yeast, and we put the gene in there, and then the yeast cell starts making insulin. So that's called genetically engineered insulin, and that means we can deliver insulin to the whole world because we have no capacity problem. If we need, we just build a new factory.
French pharmaceutical company Sanofi then announced the development of a new, improved, and even revolutionary insulin in 2000. Lantus. Known as an analog insulin, it was similar to human insulins, but with a modified gene. Sanofi's innovation prolonged its effect, but came at a hefty price. In France, a dose of Lantus then cost 46 euros. A dose of human insulin sold for 18. The analog insulin reduced the number of times a diabetic would have to inject themselves to just once every 24 hours. Pierre Chancet oversaw the Lantus launch and thinks it was a major advance.
On peut vraiment dire que Lantus As an
insulin solution, Lantus was a real revolution. It changed the lives of diabetic patients, especially type 1 diabetics who had their last injection at 10 p.m., for example, and then had to set the alarm for 5 a.m. for another injection. Hypoglycemia striking in the night had always been a threat, with fatal consequences.
The marketing was brilliant, convincing people it was much slower than the others. Slow insulin existed in 1975, when I only did 1 jab a day.
Sanofi also wanted type 2 diabetes patients to profit from what they called their wonder drug. These diabetics had traditionally only been prescribed injections if anti-diabetic pills no longer worked.
Pour ces patients de type 2, quand on les passait à l'insuline, entre guillemets, c'était la dernière étape.
For type 2 patients who were moved on to injections, it was the last stage. They were on death row. The simplicity of Lantus lowered the fear of insulin injections, and they began using it earlier. These patients were then also able to benefit from the drug.
Traitement des patients et notamment l'utilisation de l'insuline chez ces gens-là.
Glucose levels in the blood, or blood sugar, results are too complex for non-medical people to understand. That's why Sanofi introduced a user-friendly marker. The glycated hemoglobin, or long-term blood sugar test, HbA1c. The company started a major prevention campaign with a simple message that anyone could understand. Long-term blood sugar levels below 7% are okay, above 7 are problematic. A stroke of marketing genius. Within just a few years, Lantus became a pharmaceutical blockbuster. In 2015, the year of its greatest sales, and just before the patent expired, Lantus accounted for 20% of Sanofi's sales, more than 6 billion euros. But a doctor from Germany threw cold water on Lantus's victory lap. Peter Sawicki was head of IQWiG, Germany's Independent Institute for Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare.
Im Jahr 2004
In 2004, the Joint Committee, the highest body overseeing healthcare in Germany, commissioned IQWiG to evaluate this insulin glargine, Lantus, with respect to possible additional benefits. The objective was to determine if the greater cost of the drug was reflected in greater benefits. It cost the healthcare system a lot, and they wanted to know if it was justified, because ultimately, everyone was paying for it, not health insurers. The result was that there was no significant difference, and that Lantus was not superior.
Medically speaking, the analog insulin was no more effective than other drugs. Pharmaceutical representatives disagreed.
Explique moyennement ça parce que
I'm explaining it badly. If you ask a patient taking insulin to abandon their analog insulin and go back to the old insulin, and tell them not to worry, there's no disadvantages, not many would agree.
Il n'y a pas vraiment de service médical rendu, vous n'y perdrez pas. En fait, je ne sais pas si vous allez en trouver beaucoup.
The statement is unjustified?
Moi, je trouve
I think it's rather strange.
Un petit peu curieux.
Also der Leiter von Sanofi Deutschland.
The head of Sanofi Germany invited me to visit the company in Frankfurt to discuss the results. I was happy to go, But at the start of the visit, he showed me apartment buildings where lots of people depended on Sanofi and said how many of their existences would be at risk if we stood by our institute's assessment, because then all Sanofi workers would lose their jobs.
They put pressure on you.
They tried. I don't want people to lose their jobs. But we still need an objective evaluation of drugs, not just of insulin, but of all of them. And we don't have that, not in any European country.
The German authorities stood firm. Patients with type 2 diabetes using Lantus would only be reimbursed for the cost of a corresponding dose of human insulin. But Sanofi's drug kept selling well. Sales remained high, and patients grew accustomed to paying more. Other countries, including France, have also questioned the superior efficacy of Lantus. But nothing has changed. Sanofi's blockbuster remains the world's best-selling insulin. Since 2015, Sanofi's competitors, Novo Nordisk and Lilly, have also marketed long-lasting analog insulin, and they too justify the high price with attractive promises. The companies say that higher production costs contribute to analog insulin being comparatively more expensive than human insulin. But researchers at the University of Geneva disagree. They looked at the question of why 1 of 2 diabetes patients worldwide has no access to insulin.
On nous disait toujours, les insulines analogues sont beaucoup plus complexes à fabriquer que les insulines humaines.
We were told that analog insulin is much harder to produce than human, and we wanted to know a little more about the cost of manufacture. We got together with some colleagues to determine manufacturing costs by looking at each section of the production line.
On a pris le coût des matières premières, toutes les matières premières qui vont pour fabriquer un flacon d'insuline.
We took the cost of all the raw materials required for a vial of insulin, then added regulatory costs, which are significant. Regulatory costs are the expense of licensing a product. Clinical trials are required to demonstrate the drug's effectiveness. We also included a profit margin and the investment costs for infrastructure. The manufacturing cost for human insulin is between $2.50 and $3.50 a vial. For most analog insulin products, it's about the same.
Si on regarde les prix de vente en France, par exemple, un flacon d'insuline humaine est environ à 13.
Looking at the selling price in France, a vial of human insulin costs around 13 euros, whereas an analog insulin such as Lantus costs almost double, 25 euros a vial. There are 3 conclusions. First, the final price for the patient or for the healthcare system is not justified by the manufacturing costs. Second, the difference in manufacturing costs between human and analog insulin does not justify the price difference. And third, the profit margins for the pharmaceutical industry on these insulin products are enormous.
Dans beaucoup de contextes est énorme.
The pharmaceutical giant's dominance has tragic consequences in the US. Within a decade, the price of insulin has risen tenfold, even though 1/10 of the population suffers from diabetes. Many can no longer afford the vital hormone despite costly health insurance policies.
Yeah. Just kind of let people know who, like, maybe you're. I pay a $260 premium a month. That's just to have the right to say I have insurance. And my deductible is $14,000, which means I would have to pay for my insulin and for my doctor's visits and my other medical supplies out of pocket. until I reach that $14,000 mark before they'll help me pay for my insulin. And not many people can afford to pay an extra $14,000 out of their income every year. It's almost impossible for my husband and I. Right now, my insulin comes from my doctor, and it comes from my friends. My mom has friends that are also like maybe type 2 diabetic, and they have an excess of insulin that they don't use, so they've been kind enough to give that insulin to me. And my doctor, when he has patients that pass away, which has unfortunately happened recently, he gave me over a year's supply of insulin. So thankfully, I won't be paying that money right now, because it would have been catastrophic for me if I would have had to pay the money for the insulin every month.
What happens when you cannot manage to get free insulin?
I really don't know. Sorry. I really, that's the thing I've been fortunate not to have to experience yet. But it does sit in the back of my mind.
My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the founder of T1 International. We're a diabetes advocacy organization that takes no funding from pharmaceutical companies, and we advocate for everybody with type 1 diabetes, specifically access to the things that we need to survive. This company right behind me has raised the price of their insulin over 1,000%. And we believe that access to insulin is a human right. This is a global problem. People are dying in every corner of the world. People are dying here in the United States of America, what's supposed to be the wealthiest country in the world with supposedly the best healthcare system in the world. This is not the way that it should be. This company is putting profits over people, and we're here to say that that is not okay and that something needs to be done about it. Medicines for people, not for profits! One more time. Medicines for people, not for profits!
It truly is a crisis. People are rationing their insulin, so they're taking less than they should take or trying to not take any. They're trying to adjust their diet and their insulin intake, and this is so dangerous. People are dying because of that, and they're cutting years off their life because they just simply can't afford it.
My husband and I don't, in our future, we won't be able to buy a home. We can't afford that right now. We won't be able to have children. That's an expense that we wouldn't be able to afford. So I would say the biggest things we've sacrificed is just the traditional family life. That's something that we're not sure if we'll ever get to experience. We've lived a very untraditional married life for 8 years, and although, I'm very, I've loved our time together, and it's been very hard. We've had a lot of challenges. We don't get to experience the things people our age are getting to experience.
The next step here is to deliver some of these insulin vials that we have created. So this is a vial of Humalog with the label taken off and a message inside. What we've done is we've said these are the things that we sacrifice for the cost of insulin. Nicole has brought some of Alec's ashes that are in one of these vials to show the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice that they made because he couldn't afford the insulin.
Alec was facing a cost of $1,300 a month for insulin and diabetic supplies. Alec worked full-time as a restaurant manager for a small family-owned company who did not provide health insurance for its employees. Alec made decent money, and because of this, he did not qualify for assistance of any kind. Not from the insulin makers, not from the state, and not from the federal government. Without anyone knowing, Alec began to ration his remaining insulin because at the time he went to the pharmacy, he did not have enough in his bank account to spend the $1,300 required. Alec began to adjust his diet, take less insulin than his body required to make it to payday. Alec's body was found 3 days prior to payday. Alec died from diabetic ketoacidosis due to a lack of insulin in his body.
At the start of 2019, the U.S. Congress demanded pharmaceutical companies justify the enormous rises in price. The three big insulin producers blamed the U.S. healthcare system and the large number of distributors.
Today, the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations is holding a hearing entitled, quote, "Priced Out of a Life-Saving Drug, Getting Answers on the Rising Cost of Insulin."
So, Mr. Mason from Eli Lilly, who is making a profit from these increases in insulin prices?
I think, first of all, we don't want anyone not to be able to afford their insulin.
Who's making a profit with these increases in insulin prices that patients have to pay for?
Our net prices, the price that we receive, are going down.
Are you? No. Are you making a profit? Are the CEOs of your companies making these profits?
Our net prices, the price we receive, has gone down since 2009.
Well, somebody's making a profit. Somebody's getting richer on the backs of our patients. Mr. Langa from Novo Nordisk, what entity in this supply chain is prioritizing affordability and access of insulin for patients?
Well, we'd like to think we are. I mean, we participate in as many formulators as we can. As I've mentioned, that is critically most important. We have patient assistant programs as well as copay assistant programs.
So who's making a profit then?
Well, our nets are going down as well, but there is a small profit that comes.
Your nets, but your overall profits for the company and CEOs have been going up, haven't they?
No, our profits.
Take-home pay from CEOs?
Has been relatively stable.
From CEO pay hasn't gone up in the past several years?
His pay has increased, yes.
Okay.
After the hearing, the three companies pledged to reduce prices for the poorest patients, but it was no more than a PR stunt. Patients in the U.S., unlike their European counterparts, are not supported by generous reimbursement systems. For most American diabetics, insulin remains a luxury item. The price of the synthetically made hormone is just one problem facing diabetics. Another can have fatal consequences for patients. To keep their blood sugar levels below the famed 7% limit, many type 2 diabetics take many drugs and, by doing so, put their lives in danger.
Erfahren habe ich das von der damaligen Hausärztin, die hier in der Nähe ihre Praxis hatte.
I found out from our physician. She had an office near here. She did an annual check and said that my blood sugar level, the long-term average HbA1c level, was too high and that I had to take medicine.
Der ist zu hoch. Sie müssen da Medikamente nehmen.
And I lived with that for many years. But then, during that time, my blood sugar levels shot up to about 11%. And my weight was at its highest, at about 114, 115 kilos. It was actually only just pills, although I gradually took more and more of them. And then I injected insulin for about 7 years.
Da habe ich ja da nach dem ersten Erscheinen, nach dem ersten Erlebnis, wo ich dann merkte,
That was after the first time when I noticed that my body was shaking and my blood pressure wasn't quite right. When I measured my blood sugar, my device said I was below 60. And it was blinking red and saying it was no longer measurable, but under 60. And then it came to the incident at the end of August, where I nearly ended up in a coma.
Ende August, wo ich dann gesagt habe, wo ich den Fast-Koma-Anfall hier hatte.
Severe hypoglycemia could have cost the patient his life. It was a result of an obsessive attempt to keep his blood sugar level below 7%. In 2008, a study shook what had been established treatment protocols. It showed that the higher the level of drug consumption to keep blood sugar low, the greater the risk for patients. Regularly taking medicine to reduce HbA1c levels increased the risk of hypoglycemia and heart disease.
Man hat diese Person in dieser Studie mit ganz vielen Medikamenten, mit 4, 5 Medikamenten behandelt.
The people in the study were treated with lots of medications, up to 5. The study showed that it was probably the wrong approach. Intensive decreases in glycemia could reduce complications in the nerves and eyes, but what we really wanted was to reduce the risk of heart attacks and strokes. But that didn't happen. That's why the correct approach is not to focus on blood sugar levels, but rather on the study of diabetes. You need an overall picture of the cardiometabolic syndrome, with all the risk factors, and that's how we succeeded.
L'hyperglycémie, c'est toxique. Les niveaux de preuve sont évidents. C'est-à-dire que plus vous avez de sucre dans le sang,
Hyperglycemia is toxic. The evidence is incontestable. The more sugar you have in your blood, the greater the vascular toxicity. But it doesn't follow that if you have hyperglycemia, lowering the level will reduce the risk. If you have a risk marker, the higher it is, the greater the risk. A linear or automatic reduction does not necessarily reduce risk. Major studies have shown that trying too hard to lower glycemia increases risk.
vous augmentez le risque. Donc paradoxalement, là c'est démontré que si vous voulez mettre des
So paradoxically, it's been shown that if you use intensive treatments to reduce glycemia by too much, to reach a figure as close as possible to that of a non-diabetic, you might think you're as healthy as a non-diabetic person. But you're worse off than if you had left the glycemia high. Not only do patients have more complications than non-diabetics, they have more than people with higher blood sugar. They end up in the hospital with serious hypoglycemia. It's due to medication and can be severe. Mortality has been increased.
L'hypoglycémie, ça peut être extrêmement sévère. Vous avez une augmentation de la mortalité.
I had this near coma experience and said, I don't ever want to have that again.
Mr. Strenger, come with me.
Kommen Sie mir direkt mit.
Wilfried Strenger no longer takes drugs, and the blood tests show that after 3 decades with type 2 diabetes, a kind of remission, a retreat of the illness has set in. His doctor suggested a radical approach developed by a British team of researchers. It involved a strict diet. He quit eating carbohydrates, sugars, for 3 weeks, and instead drank a low-calorie, soy-based drink. Strong weight loss is generally needed to get type 2 diabetes into remission.
Beim Typ 2 Diabetes hat man lange geglaubt, einmal Diabetes, immer Diabetes, bis eine englische Arbeitsgruppe sensationelle
It was long believed that if you had type 2 diabetes, then once a diabetic, always a diabetic. Then an English research team published a sensational study. They went and found subjects that had been suffering from diabetes for some years and had them radically lose weight. They were able to show that this could cause remission in almost half to 80% of the subjects, depending on how much weight a person had lost, and that without a serious operation, just by radically losing weight. They've learned from very in-depth MRI exams that if there's too much fat on the pancreas, then insulin production falls. But that doesn't mean that it's broken, just that the cells are no longer able to produce insulin. If the fat is removed from the pancreas, then the insulin-producing cells are again able to produce more of the hormone in response to stimulation, and then blood sugar levels fall. We've done similar experiments and had comparable experiences here in Düsseldorf. We've managed to allow people who are on insulin to only rely on pills, or from pills into a complete remission. And I think that's where we're headed for the future. If a patient loses weight, they can stop taking diabetes drugs and blood pressure medication. And I may be able to prevent knee operations. We've discovered a universal remedy in lifestyle, and it works in very different areas. If you were to take all these sicknesses together, then you'd save lots and lots of money that could then be invested in this area. But the general opinion is that won't work, so we don't have to do it. And that's a problem for politicians. And then there are the associations that represent the pharmaceutical industry's interests, and different ones from universities, who have no interest in this at all. And that always makes me suspicious and sad.
Das macht mich immer etwas stutzig und traurig.
A few thousand patients in Europe and the US have already tried this method. It demands strict discipline, lots of motivation, and only a third of type 2 diabetics can hope to be healed by it. The majority will have to continue taking medication.
Je pense qu'à terme, on a gagné.
Looking ahead, I think we will win. The problem is knowing when. What we're saying will become incontrovertible evidence within a few years. In the meantime, many diabetics will die unnecessarily. Some will have had poor medical treatment, and too much will have been spent pointlessly on overpriced treatments. But the diabetic industrial complex will be swept away.
Diabetes is more than just a question of blood sugar. The illness has revealed evils within the food and pharmaceutical industries. And if governments don't react, diabetes will continue to spread.